No one ever forgets the sound of wet gravel crunching beneath their boots, especially not on the day you come home to bury the only man who ever called you son. Jack Carter stood at the edge of Hartmoor, the rain a cold, steady drumbeat on his jacket, mist swallowing the distant fells. The taxi that had dropped him was already vanishing down the lane, the taillights blurring into the silver wash of afternoon. Hartmoor looked nothing like the place he remembered as a boy. No laughter drifting from the kitchen, no bark of an old sheepdog to greet him at the gate. Just silence and the low, endless moan of wind across ruined fields. He paused at the gate, fingers lingering on splintered wood, and for a second, the ache in his chest threatened to drag him under. Hartmoor Farm was a shadow of its former self. The old barn roof caved in, half the pasture choked by nettles and thistle. Even the farmhouse seemed to shrink away from him, paint peeling, windows streaked with the sorrow of 100 storms. He pressed the key into the door with hands that shook despite himself. Arthur Carter, his stepfather, was gone, buried that very morning beneath a gray Yorkshire sky, with only 3 neighbors and a vicar who didn't remember his name. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, every creak of the floorboards echoing loss. Jack dumped his rucksack by the door and drifted from room to room, the cracked tiles of the kitchen, the faded family photos still clinging to the hallway. Each step felt like trespassing in someone else's memories. Then the phone rang, jolting him. Bank. Again. He let it ring out, staring at the blinking red light of missed messages. The same script. Mortgage in arrears, deadline coming, opportunity to discuss a positive resolution. He tossed the phone onto the table, jaw tight. Lightning flared against the window, and for a split second Jack caught a flicker of movement near the far paddock. A dark shape where the old boundary fence sagged. He stepped closer, squinting through the rain. Was it just a trick of the light? No. There it was again. A small wild pony, coal black against the storm, mane and tail whipped to streamers by the wind. It stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Jack with a strange, searching intelligence. Something primal rose inside him, an old reflex from another life. Years in Helmand Province, danger lurking beyond every ruined wall. Jack didn't think. He was already pulling on his boots, grabbing the nearest jacket. By the time he hit the porch, the pony had bolted, leaping the broken rails in a spray of mud, vanishing into the swirling fog that rolled down off the moor. Jack's heart hammered as he vaulted the fence, feet splashing through puddles, the cold biting through his socks. Camera shake, adrenaline surging, the world narrowing to the thud of his pulse and the pounding of his boots. The wind howled, lashing rain across his face, but he pressed on, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The moor opened wide before him, wild and unforgiving. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, each stride sinking into spongy turf. Somewhere ahead, the pony's silhouette darted between twisted gorse and heather, a ghost in the mist. Jack forced himself to slow, scanning for hoofprints, broken twigs, anything. The scent of wet earth, diesel, and smoke filled his lungs, and in a strange, disorienting way, he felt more alive than he had in months. The city, his job, his flat, the endless grind, felt 1,000 miles behind him. He stumbled, nearly twisting an ankle on a hidden stone, cursing under his breath. The fog thickened, swallowing sound, and for a moment he was entirely alone. Just him and the moor and the echo of old ghosts. Then, out of the swirling gray, he heard it. A sharp, nervous whinny, followed by the clatter of hooves on stone. Jack spun, catching a glimpse of the pony perched atop a rise, head high, nostrils flaring. There was something urgent in its posture, almost as if it wanted him to follow. Jack wiped the rain from his eyes, breath coming hard, and pressed on. The ground sloped upward, slick and treacherous. The world narrowed to the next step, the next slippery foothold, the flicker of black against the whiteout. The wind screamed, tearing words from his lips. His knees and palms were raw, but he pushed himself harder, closing the distance. Suddenly, the pony disappeared beyond a tumbled-down dry stone wall, the boundary marker for the Old West pasture, abandoned for years. Jack followed, ducking through a gap in the stones. The land flattened out into a hollow, half flooded by rain. He saw the pony, Shadow, he thought suddenly, the word surfacing unbidden, standing over something slumped in the bracken. For a moment, panic seized him. Was it a sheep? A calf? No. Human. A man. Mud-caked, shivering, barely conscious. Jack dropped to his knees, reaching out. The man's lips were blue, his pulse weak. He recognized him from childhood. Alfie Hughes, the old medic, missing for days. Jack's military training kicked in. Check airway, breathing, circulation. No time for fear, only action. He pulled off his jacket, wrapped Alfie, called his name, slapped his cheeks. No response, just a low groan. Jack's hands fumbled for his phone. No signal, of course. He looked up. Shadow was gone, vanished into the fog as silently as he had appeared. Jack lifted Alfie as best he could, bracing him across his shoulders. The cold cut like knives, but Jack staggered forward, step by agonizing step, back toward the distant shape of Hartmoor. Somewhere behind him, the wind howled through broken fences and empty paddocks. A warning or a promise? He couldn't tell. Rain poured harder, turning the earth beneath his feet to soup, but Jack didn't stop, didn't dare. When at last the lights of the farmhouse flickered through the murk, Jack fumbled his phone again. 1 bar, maybe 2, enough to dial 999, enough to choke out words to the operator before the battery died. As the sirens wailed down the distant lane, Jack collapsed beside Alfie, spent, soaked, hands torn and bleeding. For a long moment he lay there, staring up at the bruise-colored sky, the storm washing everything clean. Somewhere out in the dark, a wild pony whinnied once, long and lonely, and was gone. The rain had barely let up when the paramedics arrived, their flashing blue lights reflecting off the puddles scattered across the muddy lane. Jack watched as they hoisted Alfie Hughes onto a stretcher, their voices calm but urgent, calling out vital signs: oxygen, hypothermia, IV drip. Jack stumbled after them, boots sloshing, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The paramedic nearest him, a young woman with cropped hair and steady hands, nodded toward the farmhouse. "You need to get inside, get warm," she called, but Jack shook his head. He wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. They loaded Alfie into the back of the ambulance, the doors swinging wide to reveal a cramped, bright space humming with machines. Jack hovered in the rain, shirt plastered to his back, shivering but rooted to the spot. One of the paramedics paused, looking him over. "You his family?" Jack hesitated, then nodded, voice barely more than a whisper. "Sort of. Just don't let him go, all right?" The man's face softened for a split second. "We'll do our best. You should follow us to the hospital if you can. Scarborough General. He's in bad shape." The ambulance peeled away, tires spinning on slick gravel, sirens splitting the silence of Hartmoor. Jack watched until the lights disappeared down the winding road, then staggered back to the porch. His hands shook as he dug out his phone. 1% battery, a single bar of signal flickering in and out. He punched in the number for a taxi, breath fogging in the cold, words tumbling out. "Scarborough General, please, it's urgent!" Then the battery died for good, leaving him in the deep hush of the aftermath. The ride to the hospital felt endless. Jack dozed and woke, rain thundering against the window. The countryside nothing but a blur of headlights and hedgerows. By the time they reached North Yorkshire NHS, his limbs were stiff, clothes still damp, heart pounding with dread. The ER was all fluorescent lights and antiseptic, nurses moving briskly behind glass. Jack gave his name, was directed to the waiting area, and collapsed into a hard plastic chair, knees jiggling. Time crawled. Jack's thoughts flickered and spun, memories from a different life. He saw himself crouched behind a sandbag wall, the sun like a hammer overhead, sweat running into his eyes. Heard the crackle of radios, the desperate shouts for a medic, the thump of distant artillery. He'd learned then that you do what you can in the moment, and afterward, you just wait and hope. At last, a nurse appeared. "Are you Mr. Carter? You brought in Mr. Hughes?" Jack stood, swaying slightly. The nurse glanced at her clipboard, then looked him over. "He's stable for now. Severe pneumonia, dehydration, some mild hypothermia. He'll need to stay for observation, but you did the right thing bringing him in. Saved his life." Jack sagged with relief, muttering his thanks. The nurse smiled gently. "You look half frozen yourself. There's coffee in the canteen if you need it. I'll let you know if anything changes." Jack wandered the sterile hallways, hands jammed in his pockets. The world outside felt 1,000 miles away. Hartmoor, the broken fences, the wild pony who'd vanished into the mist. He found the vending machines, bought a bitter cup of coffee, sat staring at the cheap plastic table. It was quiet in the early hours, just the distant beep of monitors and the occasional burst of static from a nurse's radio. He was almost asleep when a figure appeared in the doorway. Claire Thompson, her presence unmistakable, even after all these years. She'd traded her childhood ponytail for a regulation bun, navy uniform crisp, a badge pinned to her chest that read, Lieutenant C. Thompson. She looked at him with a mix of sympathy and old affection. "Jack Carter, didn't think I'd see you here so soon." Her voice was brisk, but there was a softness beneath it. Jack managed a tired smile. "Could say the same for you, Claire. How'd you know?" She held up a manila folder. "Arthur left instructions. If anything happened, I was to give you this." She set the folder on the table. Jack stared at it, reluctant to reach out. "He really thought of everything, didn't he?" Claire nodded, her eyes kind but sharp. "He did. And you know, people round here, they need Hartmoor to stand. He was hoping you might see it that way too." Jack slid the folder toward him, opened it with hands that trembled. Inside were Arthur's last will and testament, and beneath that, a single brass key taped to an envelope. The envelope bore his name in Arthur's unmistakable scrawl. For a moment, the lump in his throat was too much. He ran a thumb over the ink, the texture of the paper, as if some part of Arthur might linger there. Claire leaned back, studying him. "Look, I know it's a lot. But you've got choices, Jack. The bank's after the land. But there's enough here to make a stand if you want to. Or sell up, walk away." Jack looked at her, searching her face for answers, but found only the steady strength he'd always admired. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked quietly. She smiled, small and sad. Some days, but this is home. Someone has to fight for it. Jack nodded, tucking the envelope into his jacket, the key cold and heavy in his palm. Outside, dawn was breaking, the rain finally easing. He thought of Shadow, the wild pony, and of Alfie's frail body lying in a hospital bed. Hartmoor needed saving, but so did the people tied to it. He rose, stretching aching limbs. "I have to get back," he said. Claire squeezed his shoulder, her grip firm. "Then go. But don't forget. Hartmoor's more than just a patch of land. It's a promise." He nodded, words sticking in his throat. In that instant, the hospital corridor felt less like a place of endings and more like a place of beginnings. As Jack left the hospital, the world outside was drenched in soft morning light, clouds parting to reveal a strip of blue. He drew in a deep breath, feeling the weight of the key, the folder, and all the unfinished business Hartmoor held for him. The journey back would be hard. Financial battles, neighbors circling like wolves, and a stubborn wild pony somewhere out in the mist. But for the first time in a long while, Jack Carter felt something more than grief tugging at his heart. Hope, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The hospital was quieter than Jack expected, every step echoing off the tile floors as he made his way down the corridor. The sterile lighting hummed overhead, painting everyone in pale, sleepless shades. He'd lost track of how many hours had passed since he'd first arrived with Alfie. Night and morning blurred together, each moment drawn out by worry, exhaustion, and the old pain that settled in his bones the moment he crossed back into Hartmoor. Jack found himself drawn to the small waiting area tucked beside the main hallway, just past the bank of vending machines. He sat heavily, elbows on his knees, staring at the patterns in the cheap linoleum. He tried to will his mind to calm, but his thoughts circled restlessly. Alfie's face, hollow and gray with fever, the wild pony's eyes locked on his, the old house standing silent in the storm. He let his head fall into his hands, the world spinning with memories. In the hush of the hospital, Jack's mind slipped back to Helmond. He remembered the relentless sun, the sharp stench of dust and gun oil, the dry rattle of his own breath in a battered helmet. There were nights he'd laid awake listening to distant artillery, tracing the cracks in the ceiling above his bunk, wondering how many of the men in his unit would make it to dawn. He'd learned to live with that tension, never fully relaxing, always waiting for the next call, the next emergency. Even now, in the quiet of the NHS hospital, he could feel his body coiled, ready for disaster. A nurse passed by, offering a brief professional smile. Jack nodded back, barely seeing her. He wondered if Alfie would remember him, if he'd understand what Jack had risked, carrying him across the moor, chasing hope into the fog. The reality of it all pressed down on him. Hartmoor's mounting debts, the decaying farmhouse, the way the land seemed to mourn Arthur's absence. For the first time, he admitted to himself how lost he felt. He was a soldier without a mission, a son without a father, a man teetering on the edge of something he couldn't name. He heard his name. Jack lifted his head, blinking the fatigue away. Claire stood in front of him, this time without her uniform jacket, her face softer in the morning light. She held out a styrofoam cup. "It's just tea, but it'll help." He took it, the heat a comfort in his cold hands. She sat beside him, silence settling easily between them. "So," Claire said at last, "what will you do about Hartmoor?" Her tone was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. Jack shrugged, staring at the tea. "I don't know. The bank's calling every day. The neighbors want the land for development. Someone's already offered to buy out the pasture. Arthur left obligations, not much else. Claire leaned back, arms crossed. You don't have to decide now, you know. But whatever you choose, it'll stick with you. Hartmoor's more than just acreage, it's the people, the stories. Arthur kept it going because he believed in that. I think he hoped you would too. Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. He never told me any of this. Not about the debts. Not about what he wanted for the farm. Just the key, the will. Like he wanted me to figure it out on my own. Claire's lips quirked into a faint smile. He always did like making things complicated. But maybe that's because he trusted you to do the right thing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. There's something else. I almost forgot. She handed it to Jack. He recognized Arthur's handwriting immediately. Jack hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a short letter, almost just a note. Jack, trust yourself, and look after Hartmoor. There's more to this place than what you see. Love, Arthur. The words punched through Jack's defenses, and for a moment he sat frozen, swallowing hard. Claire squeezed his arm. Go home. Rest. Alfie's stable. The doctors say he's tough. You can visit again this afternoon. But right now, you need to take care of yourself and figure out what you want to do. Jack nodded, folding the note into his wallet. He rose, muscles aching, heart heavy but steadier than before. He thanked Claire and left the hospital, the morning sun rising behind scattered clouds. The taxi ride back to Hartmoor was quiet, the countryside rolling past in green and gray waves. Jack watched the familiar landmarks flick by, the crooked sign for the village store, the sagging stone bridge over the river, the church spire in the distance. Each mile felt like a step deeper into his own past. He reached the farm just after noon. The rain had stopped, but puddles glistened in the ruts of the driveway, and the sky was still heavy with unshed tears. Jack walked the perimeter, boots squelching in the wet earth. He checked the barn, found nothing but silence and a couple of startled pigeons. He paused at the broken fence where he'd first seen Shadow. The wild pony was gone, the grass trampled and muddy, but hoofprints marked the ground, proof that he hadn't imagined it all. He stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind. He thought of Alfie, of Arthur's letter, of Claire's steady presence in the hospital. A slow resolve built in his chest. Hartmoor wasn't just a burden. It was a chance. A responsibility, yes, but also a promise. He turned back toward the farmhouse, the key in his palm, cold and unfamiliar. He had decisions to make, people to call, debts to face. But for the first time since Arthur's funeral, Jack Carter felt the faint stirrings of purpose. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Inside the house, Jack found the envelope Claire had given him earlier. The brass key glinted dully against the kitchen table. He traced its edges, wondering what secrets it would unlock. He didn't know if he could save Hartmoor, or if he even deserved to try. But as he gazed out at the battered fields, at the distant line of the moor, Jack realized he owed it to Arthur, to Alfie, and maybe to himself, to at least try. For now, that was enough. Night settled over Hartmoor with a chill that seeped through the cracks in the old farmhouse. Jack sat alone in the kitchen, the brass key turning restlessly in his hand. Every surface in the room seemed to whisper with memories. The battered table where Arthur used to sort through bills, the faded floral curtains his stepmother had hung years before. Cancer took her, the clock on the wall still ticking in the quiet. Rain battered the window, turning reflections into smears of gold and shadow. He'd been putting it off all day. The envelope Claire had given him sat open on the table. Arthur's short note folded beside a second, smaller key, older and dull with age. Jack took a breath, the house sighing around him. The letter had been clear. If you're reading this, the time has come. There's a place in the old cellar. Trust yourself. Make Hartmoor a place of healing. Your kind of healing. For you, for them, for all of us. Jack stood, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and made his way to the cellar door. The hallway was dark, only the dim yellow glow from the kitchen lamp to guide him. He fumbled with the key, found the old lock stiff with years of disuse, and finally heard the satisfying click as it turned. The cellar door groaned open, the scent of earth and old apples rising up to greet him. He hesitated, pulse quickening, then stepped into the darkness. The stone steps were cold under his feet, and he felt for the pull cord that hung near the bottom. A naked bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows on the uneven walls. It took him a moment to find the second door, half hidden behind stacks of empty jam jars and boxes of Arthur's old field gear. The brass key slid in, turned, and the door opened onto a cramped, secret room. Jack's breath caught. On a dusty table sat a weathered, leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and stained with age. Beside it, in a small glass case, gleamed Arthur's conspicuous gallantry cross, its ribbon faded but the silver still proud. There was a bundle of letters tied with string and a photograph of Arthur in uniform, arm around a young man Jack recognized as Mac O'Connor, both faces grinning in triumph and relief. He sat on a crate, the journal in his lap. The first page was inscribed in Arthur's careful, looping hand. If Jack reads this, then my time has come. This place is for you, son, for all of us who came back broken, and for those who never made it home. Make Hartmoor more than just a farm. Let it be a haven. Let it be hope. Jack turned the pages slowly, heart heavy. The journal was part war diary, part confession, part manifesto. Arthur wrote about the days after combat, nights spent staring at the ceiling, jumpy at every sound, the weight of medals that felt more like anchors than honors. He wrote about fellow veterans, men and women who drifted through the countryside, searching for something that would help them put themselves back together. He wrote about horses, too, about how he'd found peace in mucking out stalls and listening to the quiet, steady breathing of a half-wild foal rescued from the moor. One passage stopped Jack cold. If Hartmoor is to survive, it has to be more than just my dream. It has to become yours. Jack, I know you're scared. I was too. But the world needs places where broken things can mend. Let this be one. If you can read this, the moment is here. Jack set the journal aside, eyes stinging. He looked at the medal, the letters, the faded photograph. He felt Arthur's presence so strongly, it was as if his stepfather stood right behind him, hand on his shoulder. Make Hartmoor a place of healing. For you, for them, for all of us. He heard a sound, a faint snort, barely audible over the rain. He froze, listening. It came again, louder, a low, searching whinny that sent goosebumps up his arms. He hurried up the stairs, heart pounding. Outside, the night was thick with fog, the rain a thin mist now, swirling around the barn and paddock. Jack stepped onto the porch, straining to see through the gloom. There, in the shadows beyond the old grain shed, stood the wild pony. Shadow. The animal's dark coat shimmered under the porch light, steam rising from his flanks. Shadow's eyes were wide, alert, fixed on Jack as if waiting for something, a decision, a promise. Jack stepped down into the yard, shoes sinking in the soft earth, and the pony didn't bolt. He just watched, breath coming in little puffs in the cold. Jack's voice was barely more than a whisper. "You came back. Why?" Shadow flicked his ears but didn't move. Jack took another slow step, rain beating on his hair, jacket hanging loose. For a moment, they stood there. Two survivors, both wary and uncertain, both tethered to this battered patch of earth. Jack raised his hand, palm open. Shadow watched, muscles tense, then took a tentative step forward. The distance between them closed, and for a heartbeat Jack thought the animal might let him touch his muzzle. But just as his fingers brushed coarse hair, Shadow snorted, tossed his head, and backed away into the night. Jack exhaled, feeling something shift inside him. He turned back toward the house, heart lighter. As he stepped inside, the old clock struck midnight, echoing through the hall. He looked down at the journal, still clutched in his hand, the last entry catching the lamplight. If Jack reads this, the time has come. Jack Carter stood in the quiet kitchen, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future balanced in his palm. Hartmoor was more than land. It was legacy. It was hope. It was the chance to heal, if only he could find the courage to take it. Outside, somewhere in the mist, Shadow whinnied once more, as if in answer. The morning after Jack discovered Arthur's journal and medal, Hartmoor woke to a new kind of energy. Mist clung to the fields, silvering the hedges, but there was a subtle hum in the air, like the farm was waiting, watching to see what Jack would do next. He didn't sleep much. He spent half the night rereading Arthur's words, the other half pacing between kitchen and cellar, planning and discarding ideas. But when the first weak sunlight cracked the horizon, Jack knew there was no more room for hesitation. Hartmoor's survival, maybe even its purpose, depended on what happened next. He started with the barn. The place was a shambles, loose boards, collapsed stalls, piles of debris where rats scurried at his footsteps. Jack rolled up his sleeves and set to work, determined to wrest order from chaos. It was more than manual labor. It was a kind of therapy, a way to keep Arthur's voice alive in his mind. Every nail hammered and every plank straightened felt like a small act of rebellion against the weight of grief and debt. Yet he couldn't do it alone. Jack stepped outside to catch his breath and saw Ravi Singh's old truck rattling up the lane, the battered blue cab a familiar sight from childhood. Ravi had been one of Arthur's closest friends, a wiry man with quick hands, a big laugh, and a soft spot for stray animals and lost causes. Jack waved him over, relief mixing with nostalgia. "I heard you were back," Ravi called, climbing out, arms already spread for a hug. "Arthur would be proud, you know." Jack's reply was a tired smile, but inside he felt some small part of his burden lighten. They walked the barn together, Ravi's sharp eyes taking in every leak and splinter. "We can fix this," he declared. "But you'll need help. The community's got eyes on Hartmoor now, more than you think, especially after what you did for Alfie Hughes." Jack felt his cheeks warm at the praise. "I just did what anyone would have done." Ravi laughed. "No, you did what a Carter does. Now let's put this place back together." They got to work, hauling boards, propping up rafters, sweeping out years of dust and neglect. Ravi pulled out his phone, snapping photos and sending updates to a local Facebook group. Before noon, curious neighbors started drifting in. Some offered tools or a pair of hands. Others came with gossip or questions, but Jack didn't mind. Hartmoor was alive with activity for the first time in years. As they worked, the wild pony returned. Shadow moved warily around the edge of the paddock, never straying too close, but watching everything. Word spread fast. A wild pony at Hartmoor, sticking close even after the chaos of the storm. Ravi grinned. "You've got your own guardian spirit, Jack. People are talking." Someone from the village posted a photo of Shadow online, and within hours, the story exploded across local social media. Comments poured in. Theories about the horse's origins, what it might mean for the old Carter place. By afternoon, a BBC reporter showed up at the farm gate, microphone in hand and a cameraman in tow. She introduced herself, flashing a press badge. "Is it true? A wild pony led you to rescue a missing man?" Jack blinked, caught off guard. Yes, but it's not about me. Alfie Hughes is alive because of luck and a stubborn pony." The reporter pressed for details, camera rolling as Jack told the story. About the storm, the chase through the moor, how Shadow kept coming back as if he belonged to the land. The local news segment aired that evening, and suddenly Hartmoor was the center of a small media storm. Jack's phone buzzed with messages from strangers and old friends. Some wanted to donate, others offered advice or support. A charity for veterans emailed, suggesting Hartmoor could become a model for equine-assisted therapy, a place for former soldiers, first responders, and anyone else looking to heal. Jack barely had time to process it all when the phone rang again, this time from the nearest care home. The nurse sounded breathless. "Jack, it's Mac O'Connor. He's gone. He took a set of keys, says he's coming to Hartmoor. We think he's driving." Jack's heart leapt into his throat. Mac was one of Arthur's oldest comrades, a legend in the local regimental circles, but his mind wandered since the last stroke. He wasn't supposed to drive, not anymore. Without thinking, Jack grabbed his coat and bolted outside. The sun was sinking low, throwing long shadows across the yard. Ravi called after him, concern etched on his face. "What's happened?" Jack explained as they jogged to the road, scanning for headlights. "Mac's on his way. He shouldn't be driving, but if he says he's coming here, he'll find a way. That old man's stubborn as hell." For a tense hour they waited by the lane, Jack's nerves stretched tight. Ravi checked his phone for updates, but the care home staff didn't know where Mac had gone. Jack paced, mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He remembered Mac from his own childhood, how the old soldier could fix anything, tell the wildest stories, scare off bullies just by looking their way. But time and age had taken their toll, blurring the sharpness in his eyes. Just as darkness settled for real, a battered Volvo crawled up the drive, headlights flickering. Jack ran to the car as it rolled to a stop, relief flooding through him. Mac O'Connor climbed out slowly, wearing his old regimental cap, a stubborn glint in his eye. "Told them I had business at Hartmoor, didn't I?" he muttered, voice rough but proud. Ravi helped steady him, and Jack felt tears sting his eyes. "You made it, Mac. Welcome home." The three of them stood together in the driveway, under the uncertain stars. Behind them, Shadow grazed quietly, unconcerned by the drama. Hartmoor, for a brief moment, felt whole again, held together by friendship, memory, and the hope that somehow they could build something new from the pieces left behind. Mac O'Connor's arrival at Hartmoor felt like the return of a legend, but the reality was bittersweet. In the crisp dawn light, the old soldier shuffled around the farmhouse kitchen, mug of tea clutched in trembling hands, eyes wandering from Jack to Ravi to the window, as if searching for the past in the shape of the mist outside. His memory flickered, sharp and vivid one moment, foggy and far away the next. Jack watched him with a quiet ache, grateful for Mac's stubbornness, but painfully aware of how fragile everything had become. They sat at the kitchen table, Mac tracing his finger along the rim of his mug, voice cracking as he recounted stories from the old days. Some tales made sense. How he and Arthur had survived Goose Green in the Falklands, the nights they'd camped out under tarps, making jokes to keep the cold at bay. Other stories drifted, mixing names and years, sometimes jumping from a Yorkshire pub to the wind-scoured cliffs of the South Atlantic in the space of a breath. But when Mac spoke of battle, everyone listened. The way his eyes brightened, his hands coming alive as he described the chaos, the fear, the fierce brotherhood that pulled them through. Ravi wiped his eyes with a sleeve, and even Jack, who'd known war himself, felt the power of those memories. After breakfast, the three of them walked the land together. Mac insisted on using his old cane, moving with slow determination. The barn looked better already. Tools stacked neatly, the scent of fresh straw drifting out into the cool air. Ravi talked about expanding the project, turning Hartmoor into a real sanctuary for veterans. Arthur always dreamed of it, he said, voice low. Somewhere we could all come, work the land, help each other. Not just horses, but a real haven. Jack felt the possibility stirring inside him. He thought of Arthur's journal, the stories of healing through work and animal care. Shadow watched from the edge of the paddock, ears flicking, almost as if listening in. Ravi knelt in the dirt, holding out an apple. To everyone's surprise, Shadow took it, nudging Ravi's hand gently before stepping back. The sight made Jack's chest tighten with hope. This strange, wild pony slowly learning to trust them. Back inside, they drew up plans. Jack's head spun with ideas. Therapy sessions in the old hayloft, local volunteers helping with repairs, maybe even an outreach to other farms or veteran groups. Mac was eager, determined to help in any way he could, though the effort sometimes left him exhausted. Let's call it Hartmoor Haven, he suggested, eyes shining. A place for men like us. A place to mend, in every sense. Jack nodded, writing the name at the top of a notepad, feeling the words settle in his bones. Ravi grinned. First, we need to show everyone we mean business. Clean up the grounds, fix the fences, get the horses ready. Then we invite the local press back. Show them what Hartmoor can be. They spent the afternoon working, joined by more neighbors than Jack had dared hope for. Some came to fix a fence. Others just brought tea or cake. Word had spread about Mac's arrival. His old regiment sent a care package, and a local charity delivered fresh supplies for the barn. Shadow lingered closer than ever, sometimes even letting the children stroke his neck, his wariness slowly melting away. The story of the wild pony who rescued a veteran had taken on a life of its own, but for every victory, there was still a looming threat. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Jack sorted through the mail and found another letter from the bank. The words were brutal in their clarity. 30 days to prove financial viability, or the farm would be repossessed. He stared at the letter until his hands shook, the weight of the deadline pressing down on him. 30 days. It seemed impossible. Jack shared the news with Ravi and Mac as the kitchen darkened, the air growing heavy. For a moment, the hope they'd built seemed fragile. Mac gripped Jack's arm, voice fierce. We've survived worse. Goose Green looked impossible too, until we made it through together. Don't you give up now, son. Ravi leaned over the table. We need a real plan, a proposal, numbers, photos, the works. I've got contacts in the council, and the BBC's still interested. If we can get them to run a story on Hartmoor Haven, maybe even bring in some veterans to tell their stories, someone will listen. They worked late into the night, piecing together a plan by lamplight. Jack drafted letters to local officials, wrote up an application for charity status, and started a crowdfunding page online. Ravi uploaded photos and videos of the pony, Mac's stories, even the half-finished barn. They called in every favor they could. Jack's hands trembled with fatigue, but he pushed through, driven by a mix of fear and stubbornness. Outside, Shadow paced the fence line, a sentinel in the moonlight. When the last email was sent, Jack stood on the porch and let the cool night air fill his lungs. The farm was quiet, but alive. Every shadow holding the memory of Arthur and the hope of something new. He thought of all they'd survived. Mac, Ravi, even Shadow, each scarred and stubborn in their own way. The fight for Hartmoor was only just beginning, but for the first time, Jack believed they might win. Inside, Mac's voice drifted from the kitchen, laughter mingling with the rattle of teacups and Ravi's low, steady encouragement. The past and the future met at that table, and in the gentle hush of Hartmoor, Jack Carter let himself hope. 30 days to save everything. 30 days to prove that healing was possible. For the farm, for the men who called it home, and for the wild pony whose trust was slowly, stubbornly, being earned. It was just before dawn when Jack's phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the fragile quiet he'd clung to in restless sleep. For a split second, he wondered if it was more bad news from the bank, but as he scrambled to answer, he saw Ravi's name flashing on the screen. Jack's heart kicked up. Ravi didn't call this early unless something was wrong. Jack answered on the second ring, voice thick. "Ravi?" Ravi's words tumbled out, sharp and breathless. "Alfie's missing. Left the hospital sometime after midnight. They say he signed himself out. Said he had to get back to Hartmoor. Jack, he's not well. He's on foot, and it's freezing out there." Jack swung his legs out of bed, pulling on yesterday's jeans and boots in a single frantic motion. "I'm on it. Text me the last place he was seen." He barely had time to throw on a jacket before Mac appeared in the hallway, cane in hand, concern etched in every line of his face. Jack didn't need to explain. Mac's eyes said he already knew. Together they stepped out into the gray morning, the farm still shrouded in mist and heavy with the sense of something gone terribly wrong. The air was icy, breath steaming as Jack crossed the yard to the barn. Shadow was already waiting by the paddock, restlessly pawing at the ground, ears flicking back and forth as if he could sense the worry. Jack paused, feeling a strange jolt of intuition. Shadow hadn't been this agitated since the night he led Jack to Alfie the first time. For a moment, man and pony regarded each other in the pale light. Then, with a toss of his head, Shadow bolted away from the fence and vanished into the mist, racing toward the moor. Jack didn't hesitate. He ran to the shed, yanked open the doors, and wheeled out the old ATV. Mac followed as far as the gate, voice hoarse with urgency. "Don't go alone, Jack. Call if you find him." Jack nodded, swinging onto the ATV and gunning the engine. The machine roared to life, spitting gravel as he tore out onto the track, headlights cutting twin tunnels through the fog. His hands gripped the handlebars tight, mind racing. He remembered the last rescue, how close Alfie had come to dying, how the land itself seemed to conspire to swallow a man whole if he slipped. He wouldn't let that happen again. The moor was a world unto itself at this hour. Endless sweeps of heather and bracken, scattered stones shining with frost, the air sharp and clean. Jack slowed as he crested a low ridge, heart pounding in his ears. He could barely see 10 yards in any direction, the mist folding around him like a shroud. He called Alfie's name, voice lost in the vastness, every answer drowned in wind and distance. Then, a shape, moving low along the slope. Jack killed the engine and listened. A faint cough, a shuffling step. He scrambled off the ATV, boots slipping in the wet grass, and found Shadow standing guard beside a crumpled form near a cluster of rocks. Alfie Hughes. His face was pale, eyes glassy, breaths shallow and ragged. Shadow stood close enough that his warm breath stirred Alfie's hair, as if determined not to let the man slip away. Jack dropped to his knees, checking Alfie's pulse, his own hands steady from years of battlefield triage. "Stay with me, Alfie. Come on, buddy. Don't do this to me." Alfie blinked, recognition flickering. "Had to come back. Told Arthur I would help. Hartmoor." Jack's voice cracked. "You did help, Alfie. But you can't do anything lying out here in the cold. We're getting you home, okay? Stay awake for me." He fumbled for his phone. 1 bar of signal. He pressed 999, the operator's calm voice barely audible above his thundering pulse. "I have a man in his 60s. Hypothermic, unconscious. Yes, I have a location. We're near the old standing stones, north of Hartmoor Farm." The operator kept him on the line, guiding him through checks as Jack stripped off his jacket and wrapped Alfie as best he could. Shadow lingered, pressing his muzzle against Alfie's hand, refusing to budge. Minutes dragged by, every second marked by Alfie's labored breathing and the distant thump of helicopter rotors as the rescue team homed in. Jack waved his arms, signaling their position, and within moments, the crew descended, a blur of red jackets and professional urgency. They lifted Alfie onto a stretcher, voices clipped and confident, and whisked him into the chopper. Jack stood back, adrenaline draining away, watching as the aircraft lifted off, the roar and downdraft flattening the grass and sending Shadow galloping across the moor in wild, frantic circles. As the helicopter vanished into the clouds, Jack stood alone, heart hammering, body shaking with cold and relief and something close to awe. He turned in a slow circle, the wind rising as the sun finally crested the hills. The moor was waking up, golden light breaking through the mist. Shadow circled back, stopping just out of reach. Jack walked toward him, slow and steady, and this time, Shadow let him touch his mane. Just for a moment. A silent thank you, or maybe a recognition that man and pony were in this together now. He led Shadow back to the farm, moving carefully, feeling every bruise and scrape. Mac and Ravi met him at the gate, anxiety melting into shaky laughter as they listened to his retelling of the rescue. Jack slumped onto the steps, exhausted but alive, and for a moment, all the battles against the bank, the doubts, the years of loss, faded. There was just the farm, his friends, and the wild spirit of the moor, holding them together through storm and sunrise. The fight was far from over, but this morning, hope felt stronger than fear. The rescue helicopter had barely faded from view when the stillness of the moor settled again, cool and electric beneath a rising sun. Jack stood at the edge of the pasture, arms folded, breath steaming in the crisp morning air. His muscles ached, but every sense was alive. The world felt changed, like the ground itself remembered the night's chaos and wanted to offer a new beginning. As Jack guided Shadow back through the battered gate, he noticed something odd on the far side of the field. 3 new shapes, moving slowly through the heather. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light or wishful thinking after a sleepless night. But then the shapes grew clearer. Ponies, wild and unclaimed, coats streaked with morning dew, heads held high as they surveyed the land. Shadow lifted his nose, let out a low, eager whinny, and the 3 ponies answered, forming a loose semicircle just beyond the fence. Jack's heart hammered. He walked Shadow closer, feeling the air vibrate with anticipation. The new ponies hesitated, wary but curious, their eyes sharp and intelligent. It was as if Shadow was calling them in, not just to safety, but to something more. Jack held his breath as one by one the ponies stepped forward, their trust growing with each careful stride. Shadow stood tall, a guardian and a guide, as if claiming both the land and the responsibility for his newfound herd. News travels fast in the countryside, but nothing moves faster than a story with a hint of magic. By mid-morning, a local TV crew was parked at the end of Hartmoor's Lane. They set up their tripods and mics as the mist burned off, broadcasting live to the region. The segment showed Shadow and the new arrivals, the battered barn in the background, and Jack, mud-splattered and tired but standing proud, with Mac and Ravi at his side. The reporter's voice was bright with excitement. The Carter Farm, now Hartmoor Haven, has become an unexpected symbol of hope. Wild ponies returning home, veterans finding new purpose, a community coming together. If you're watching from home, this is what healing looks like in Yorkshire's heartland. The footage caught Shadow nuzzling one of the new ponies, the others grazing nearby. A brief shot of Mac, holding court with the neighbors and telling stories about Goose Green, drew a burst of laughter from the crowd. Ravi was everywhere at once, directing traffic, giving interviews, explaining the project's vision for equine therapy and community outreach. The old barn, still rough around the edges, looked more alive than it had in years, with volunteers painting the doors and a fresh delivery of hay stacked high. Jack didn't have time to savor any of it, because his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, a representative from Help for Heroes, the UK veterans charity. Her tone was all business, but Jack could hear excitement bubbling beneath. "We've seen the news. If you can commit to making Hartmoor Haven a real, sustainable program, veterans, horses, mental health support, we're ready to pledge £100,000. That's a starting grant. We want to see this work. Can you do it?" Jack almost dropped the phone. For a heartbeat, he couldn't answer. The weight of the past weeks, the debts, the cold nights, the doubt, felt like it was sliding off his shoulders. He steadied his voice. "Yes, we can do it. This is what Arthur wanted, and what we need. Thank you. Thank you so much." The caller laughed, promising to follow up with paperwork and a site visit. When Jack shared the news, Mac set aside his cane and pulled him into a crushing hug, tears streaming down his lined cheeks. Ravi whooped and cheered, slapping Jack on the back until the whole crowd joined in. Even the TV crew caught the moment, zooming in on Jack's raw emotion as the magnitude of the grant settled over him. For the first time since Arthur's funeral, Jack allowed himself to sob, open, cleansing tears that seemed to wash away months of fear and pain. Shadow trotted over, nose bumping Jack's arm, as if sensing his relief. Jack knelt, burying his face in the pony's mane, whispering his gratitude into the warm, living darkness. Mac stood nearby, hands trembling. Then, without warning, he let go of his cane entirely and wrapped an arm around Jack's shoulders. Together, they watched the herd, the land, the people, all coming together under the pale Yorkshire sun. The day rolled on in a blur of celebration and hard work. The BBC aired a follow-up, the crowdfunding page exploded with new donations, and local officials arrived to walk the grounds. For once, Jack didn't flinch at the attention. Every handshake, every kind word, every volunteer with a paintbrush or wheelbarrow was a lifeline, binding Hartmoor together in a patchwork of hope. By sunset, the volunteers were gone, but the core team lingered. Jack, Mac, Ravi, and a handful of friends sat on the barn steps, mugs of tea warming their hands. The ponies grazed quietly in the dusk, their breath rising in gentle clouds. The future was still uncertain. There would be contracts to sign, permits to chase, challenges to meet. But for tonight, none of that mattered. Hartmoor Haven was real, and it belonged to all of them. Jack looked at the sky, at the ponies, at the men beside him. Arthur always said no one should have to fight alone after coming home. Maybe this is how we prove him right. Max smiled, eyes misty but fierce. You did it, Jack. We all did. Ravi squeezed Jack's shoulder, voice steady. Let's keep going. For everyone who needs a place like this. The last rays of sunlight caught Shadow's mane as he led his herd across the field, a living, breathing emblem of freedom and second chances. For the first time in years, Jack Carter didn't feel like a man haunted by his past. He felt like someone finally coming home. Early autumn brought a gentler quiet to Hartmoor Haven. After the storms, real and metaphorical, the land itself seemed to breathe easier. The grass glowed green after so much rain, and the air held that bright, sharp chill that told you the days were getting shorter, the nights longer. But for the first time in years, hope felt more permanent than fear. Jack woke up before dawn each morning, listening to the soft nickering of ponies through the open window, the farmhouse now humming with purpose. The transformation was astonishing. It started with simple, practical things. The old barn, once a symbol of Hartmoor's slow decay, was now freshly painted and warm. Inside, Ravi supervised volunteers building new stalls and a corner space for physical therapy. Plenty of light, stacks of soft blankets, shelves lined with vet supplies and horse treats. Mac had somehow convinced half the village to help, his legendary charm and stubborn will impossible to resist. There was laughter on the wind, the clang of hammers, the sweet tang of hay and sawdust. Jack stepped into this new rhythm like a man waking from a long sleep. He spent long hours in the yard, hauling boards, fixing fence posts, shoveling feed, his muscles burning with good, honest work. There was never a moment's rest, but the exhaustion felt different now, less like drowning and more like being pulled along by a current of possibility. He caught himself smiling at odd moments, watching Shadow lead the new ponies in lazy laps around the paddock, seeing Mac regale a crowd of local teens with stories from wars that now seemed, somehow, part of the farm's story, too. The most important addition, though, came on a Tuesday just after sunrise. Jack was mucking out stalls when a dusty Land Rover pulled up and a woman stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. She wore her long hair in a braid, eyes bright behind round glasses, and a battered canvas satchel swung from her shoulder. Emily Collins, she introduced herself, shaking Jack's hand with a firm grip. Vet and horse researcher. I've read about what you're doing here. Would you mind if I helped out? Emily brought expertise and heart. She checked every pony, Shadow, the newcomers, even the oldest, half-wild gelding from the far field. She moved with a calm confidence that put the animals at ease, chatting softly as she ran her hands along their legs, checked their teeth, made notes in a weatherproof notebook. Jack watched her work, grateful for her quiet professionalism, the way she listened to the land and the animals as much as the people. Over the next weeks, Emily became part of the team. She and Jack met with local officials and NHS representatives, outlining plans for Hartmoor's therapy program. The process was exhausting. Pages of legal forms, site safety inspections, requirements for data collection and privacy, endless questions about staffing, funding, insurance, partnerships. Jack found himself sitting up late at the kitchen table, eyes burning from spreadsheets and emails. But each time he wanted to give up, someone would knock on the door. A neighbor with homemade bread, a veteran looking for a cup of tea, a council rep bringing news that another grant application had been approved. One golden afternoon, Mac joined Jack and Emily in the paddock, leaning on the new fencing, his cane mostly forgotten. "When I was a young man, I thought healing meant forgetting," Mac said, watching Shadow nuzzle one of the mares. "But I see now, it's about making something good out of what's left, like what you're doing here." Jack listened, understanding more than words could say. "We're trying. Some days, I'm not sure we'll ever get it right." Emily smiled, reaching out to rest a gentle hand on Jack's arm. "No one ever does. But look, this place is already changing lives. You just have to keep showing up." As the program took shape, Hartmoor Haven buzzed with activity. Contractors built a therapy room next to the barn. Big windows, gentle ramps, comfortable chairs for counseling sessions and group meetings. Local school kids painted a mural on the far wall. Bright swirls of color, horses galloping beneath a Yorkshire sky, stick figures with medals and grins. There were moments of chaos. Shadow escaping to chase the postman, Mac loudly arguing with Emily about the best treatment for an old war wound, Ravi accidentally flooding the barn when he forgot to turn off the hose. But there was laughter, always laughter. One evening, as the sky blazed with sunset, the team gathered in the yard. Emily leaned on the paddock fence. Ravi passed around mugs of strong tea, and Mac held court in his favorite chair. Jack found himself watching the ponies, their bodies glowing in the gold light. Shadow came close, bumping Jack's hand, eyes steady and bright. "You know," Jack said quietly, "I used to think this place was cursed. Too many ghosts, too much loss. But now, I think it's a place for new beginnings." Emily nodded, her voice soft. "You're right. The world needs places like Hartmoor, where people can come and learn to trust again, where broken things can grow strong." Ravi raised his mug. "To Hartmoor Haven, may it always be a home for anyone who needs one." They toasted, laughter ringing out across the fields. That night, Jack stood alone beneath a sky scattered with stars, the farmhouse warm and full behind him. He breathed deep, the scent of hay and heather carrying hope on the wind. He knew the work was just beginning. There would be setbacks, hard days, moments of doubt. But for the first time, the burden felt light enough to carry. He had a team, a purpose, and a land that seemed willing to heal right alongside the people on it. He looked back at the windows glowing golden, at the figures moving inside, at Shadow and his herd grazing in the twilight. The battle wasn't over, but Hartmoor Haven was real, and in its own small way, it was changing the world, one step, one story, one second chance at a time. Hartmoor Haven woke on opening day to the kind of sunlight that felt rare and golden, like a promise after too many seasons of rain. The sky stretched wide and blue above the freshly painted barn, the old farmhouse windows shining, the fields dotted with wildflowers and the easy movement of horses. Everything felt clean and new, though the air buzzed with anticipation and the weight of all that had led to this moment. Jack stood by the entrance with Ravi and Emily, watching as the first group of veterans and their families arrived. There was a tentative hush, men and women who'd carried burdens heavier than anyone could see, their eyes scanning the grounds, searching for safety, for proof that this place really was what it claimed to be. The team greeted each visitor by name, offering handshakes, cups of tea, or just a quiet nod. Mac was there too, in his regimental blazer and best cap, Cane replaced for the day with the strong grip of Jack's arm. For Mac, this was more than a homecoming. It was a living legacy. As the sun rose higher, laughter and conversation filled the yard. Children played by the paddock, daring each other to see who could get closest to Shadow and his herd. The ponies, freshly brushed and gleaming, were the stars of the day. Shadow led his little band through the gate, trotting around the arena in a loose parade that drew cheers and applause. The horses were living proof. Wildness could be tamed, wounds could heal, and second chances were real. The ceremony began with simple words. Emily welcomed everyone, her voice clear and steady. She spoke of the science and heart behind equine therapy, the evidence that horses could teach trust, patience, and courage better than any classroom. She thanked the volunteers, the donors, and the friends who had worked until their hands bled. Then Ravi took the microphone, spinning a quick, clever tale about Mac and Arthur's first misadventure with a pony, and how a stubborn horse once saved them both from a freezing night on the moor. Laughter echoed across the yard, breaking the tension and bringing the group together. When it was Jack's turn to speak, he found himself searching for words, his throat tight. He looked out at the crowd, veterans with medals shining on worn jackets, children swinging on the fence, neighbors and strangers drawn here by hope. Shadow and the ponies waited near the fence, as if listening too. Jack cleared his throat, voice rough but strong. I never thought I'd come back to Hartmoor, he began. I never thought I'd find a reason to fight for it, or that it could be more than a reminder of what I'd lost. But somewhere along the way, it became clear. Hartmoor isn't just a place. It's a promise that no one who served or suffered has to be alone. A promise that healing matters as much as medals, and that nature and community and action together can change lives. He paused, letting the words sink in. This farm taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding new meaning, building something from the broken pieces. We're here to welcome anyone who needs a place to start again. No one has to fight their battles alone. Not here, not ever again. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then applause rolled across the yard, fierce and proud. Mac clasped Jack's shoulder, eyes bright with pride, and Ravi beamed, his arm thrown around Emily's shoulders. The rest of the day unfolded like a festival. There were tours of the barn, therapy sessions in the new clinic, pony rides for children, and a long table laid with food from every neighbor in the village. Local officials arrived, shaking hands and promising ongoing support. NHS staff explained the new partnership, and Emily walked them through every stall, every plan, every chart detailing the farm's approach to veteran well-being. For a few hours, worry melted away, replaced by laughter, good food, and a sense that, just maybe, this small corner of Yorkshire could offer something lasting. As the afternoon waned, Mac took the floor for a final toast. He spoke of Arthur, his grit, his humor, his dream of a place where men and women could come home to themselves. Arthur believed in second chances, Mac said, voice trembling with emotion. He believed that a wild pony could teach us more about living than 100 parades. He believed in Jack, in all of us, and in Hartmoor. Let's honor that. Let's look after each other, here and everywhere. The ceremony ended with Shadow and his herd making one last gallop across the yard, hooves drumming on soft earth, tails flying, manes shining in the sunset. The children ran to the fence, shouting and clapping, and for a moment, every scar and sorrow was lifted by the beauty of that simple, perfect movement. Emily wiped her eyes. Ravi snapped a dozen photos, and Jack just watched, grateful and awed. In the quiet that followed, as guests lingered and the sky turned amber, Jack wandered the fields with Emily. They talked about the future, expanding the program, bringing in more veterans, training new staff, forging deeper ties with NHS and local authorities. Emily's ideas were practical but ambitious. Research projects, partnerships with other farms, a long-term vision for green care across the region. Jack nodded, each suggestion feeling less impossible, more like another step on a path that started with loss and ended with hope. At sunset, Mac, Ravi, and Emily joined Jack on the hill above the barn. The lights below shimmered, the ponies grazing peacefully, the farmhouse glowing with warmth and life. They stood in silence, shoulders touching. Jack spoke quietly, not to the others, but to the land itself. A wild pony can't change the world, but maybe because of him, we can change each other's lives. The others nodded, the truth settling deep. As the stars blinked on, Shadow whinnied, once, sharp and clear, echoing across the moor. Hartmoor Haven's story was only just beginning, and as the camera crew packed up and the last neighbors waved goodbye, Jack watched the horizon, grateful for every struggle, every risk, every scar that had brought him home. A new legacy was being written, one of resilience, compassion, and the wild, stubborn hope that together anything is possible. Fade out. Shadows whinny, wind sweeping the fields, and the quiet, unbreakable promise of a farm and a community that would never let anyone be alone again.